Gentlemen, please welcome Mary Rowe.
I'm really noticing that you're like at church. There's a whole bunch of seats vacant here in the first 4 rows. All those Episcopalians, now's the time. I see you being there, I appreciate that, but I'm looking at a sea of empty spaces, so we feel lonely up here. Please stave off that tendency to sit at the back, and please come and join us here. Wasn't that great to have Mark Dunkelman? And isn't it great to be here? I'm so happy to see you. Absolutely. You know, I'm interested that we've gone from Penn Station and the whole discussion of infrastructure, and I heard my colleague Margaret Newman say first time that Penn and culture has been named in the same sentence. Well, that is what MAS is about. It's about having that kind of holistic conversation about how it all fits together and how livability and resilience don't have to be traded off, that as city builders we believe that it's an integrated, holistic approach that we always take. So I'm thrilled to have 3 city builders who really embody those values, and we're going to talk a little bit about community-based resilience and innovation networks and how important that was. And Mark was a perfect lead-in, so by all means go get that book, The Vanishing Neighbor, from your independent bookstore near you. Support your local economy, and get Mark's book, because he and I appreciate him tying in with Jane Jacobs, because it's about how we work together and how that great collaboration that is the city, that is the great invention that we as human beings have created, maybe our greatest creation. It's all about how we enable each other and how we make things happen in the aggregate that we couldn't do alone. So you're going to hear lots about that. If you've had a good look at this program book, which is fabulous, you'll see that we're trying to touch on all different aspects of this, the resilience, livability, interaction. And I also just want to make a shout out to my pal, Alex Engel, who is making us look like we're hip at MAS, that we've got this Twitter stream. So by all means, tweet, and Alex is listening, aren't you, Alex? And he's putting it all up there for people that are here in the house and people who are out in the audience in other cities listening too. Hey. Hello. Hey. So glad to have you. It's just terrific to have the 3 of you. And we've had a chance to work over the years, and I want us to just get right into the notion of what resilience is, how we define it, and how you're experiencing it. And you've come from a distance. You've come from the Bronx, and you've come from Queens. We're happy to have you. And let's just get right into it. How do you want to define resilience? Latoya, why don't we start? And actually, I think I have a slide. If I press this button, something's going to happen.
Resilience.
I picked that slide. I took this slide. It's of Latoya's town. And to me, that's resilience, baby. So talk to us.
That reminds me of a shot of a refrigerator post-Katrina that was wrapped up and said, "Do not enter. My insurance adjuster is inside." But resilience, to me, when I think about it, it's a place and a time when you're at your knees, and all you can do when you look around and you see your fellow neighbors, your friends, your people, and together, when no one else is there, we're there, and we're able to work together to pull ourselves up and do what it takes to get the job done when government isn't there, when no one is literally there. Well, you have one another. So it's a great segue, as you said.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and even if government is there, I mean, Latoya was in New Orleans, a lifelong New Orleanian, involved in rallying her neighbors. Her Broadmoor neighborhood was one of the ones, if you know the lore about post-Katrina, it had a green dot put on it to suggest it wouldn't redevelop. Those that were involved in that study, some of which are in the House, will know that that green dot wasn't their intention, but that's how the media took it. And Latoya said, "I don't think so. Our neighborhood's coming back." So it's an interesting sort of metaphor for what happens. And I remember one of your colleagues at that time, after a couple of years, said, you know, we waited, you know who this is, we waited for a couple of years. We kept thinking the government was going to come over, that the cavalry was going to come up over across the hill and be there. And we realized they weren't coming.
We were the cavalry.
You were the cavalry. Yeah, okay. Kelly, let's go. I have a slide for you, too. Let me just see if it's equally colorful. Yeah, there it is. That's my slide for you.
Oh,
you know, this is sort of the New York flavor.
My mom's name is Sandra, but, so in some respects, but to build off exactly what LaToya was saying, it's about realizing that you are your best hope and always will be, and you are the answer to all of your problems. You're the solutions. And oftentimes in the work, especially around community development and government and politics, when we have neighborhoods that are quote unquote troubled, right? And you're talking about generational poverty and you're talking about all these ailments. There's a deficit approach to that. And there's an implied notion that the people are the problems. And resiliency is about realizing that the people are actually the solutions. The problems are all of these social infrastructure and inequities that have been created, and the people just have to deal with them. So resiliency is really looking at your cup half full as opposed to half empty, and always being strategic, even when there is no disaster. Because for us, in a neighborhood like Hunts Point, or in the poorest parts of Queens, or in the poorest parts of New Orleans, Sandy's every day, Katrina's every day. Because if it's not a natural disaster that we're facing a social crisis, all right? And so resiliency is about recognizing that and then placing the strategy that you're enabling your community to create for themselves, to facilitate and implement for themselves, and then placing that within the context of environmental justice and climate justice. So for me, that's how I would sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think this notion that we have to, the glass half, what are we saying, half full?
The glass is half
Yeah,
full.
that it's asset-based, right? That you
Yes.
look at what you've got and then you work from that. I think that this is one of the concepts, those of us that have grabbed onto resilience, part of why we have is that we see it as an empowering concept that isn't a passive one. It's not something that's done to you. It needs to be something that you cultivate. And I think the struggle then is how do you get networks to form up, because it can't just be one neighborhood by itself. I mean, the experience both for Katrina and for Sandy is disproportionately vulnerable populations experience the stress of this. And so in isolation, it's not enough. It's too difficult. So how do we find a situation to create those links, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is part of what the connective tissue piece. Bishop Taylor, I've got a slide for you too. I don't think it has any cute phrases on it, though. I think it's just you in action. You know what it is? It's you leading a Jane's Walk.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because a lot of what I base our work on is what my dad said before he died. He said, if one voice speaks, it can easily be ignored, but if 1,000 voices speak, it can never be ignored.
Right.
And I think resilience is really about being humble enough to realize that you can't do it alone. You have to organize all the social networks that exist in the neighborhoods that you're desirous to work in and improve, and bring them all together in an alliance, breaking that historical mold of trying to change communities from the outside in and doing it from the inside out. And I think that Mark made a great point. When you bring people around the table, and, growing up in public housing, and I have a strong academic background. I have a PhD. You didn't know that, Mary. That's a public.
Yes, doctor. Dr. Bishop.
Yes, doctor. That's a public housing degree.
Yeah, I get that. Oh, that one. Oh, anybody else got that one? A few of us have got that
I'm the
one.
only one that has that, right?
That PhD.
So,
Okay, then.
Growing up in Queensbridge, the largest public housing development in the country gives you gravity in that space. But it's interesting when you hear the thoughts and ideas of people that are sometimes voiceless and don't have the opportunity to speak to power and bring those ideas to the fore, how it really changes what you think about things.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that pre-existing condition thing, that challenge, because I've been through a few of these now where I just am in communities listening after some kind of a shock. And, one of the things that we need to always remember about cities around the country and around the world is that some have a slow Katrina or a slow Sandy. It doesn't have to be a dramatic event. I think the work of the Rockefeller Foundation around 100 Resilient Cities is trying to make this point. There's a number of stresses, chronic, that can all of a sudden mount up and then overwhelm a city. And I think that's one of the challenges, is how do we address underlying conditions so that no matter what's next, we've got the capacity to be able to deal with it, right? And let's talk a little bit about the challenges of that, because, you know, there is a tendency, I think, to assume with resilience is becoming a big word now.
Right.
Government's into it.
Right.
Big business are into it.
Right.
How do we continue to keep it granular? What do you think?
I think we have to, like for New Orleans, for example, we had gotten resources some time ago to hire a resiliency officer for the city. That has yet to have taken place. I know it's forthcoming in the next couple of weeks or so as we get ready for a resilience conference. But, you know, why should it take so long? You have people doing the work on the ground, surely demonstrating the resiliency that exists. And so I think it's still time for government to kind of catch up with the people who are literally doing the work.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, where do you think the innovation comes from? I mean, we might argue the innovation actually comes from those engaged on the ground, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to waiting for government.
I think so.
I mean, Kelly, you just went through Rebuild by Design. You know about this process. You heard about it last year here at the summit. Rebuild by Design being an interactive process to compete for federal dollars.
Absolutely.
What was your experience in doing that?
Well, I mean, Rebuild by Design came in to our lives in Hunts Point at a particular place and time. But what I want to say is that, you know, innovation happens on the ground because we have no choice.
Right. because it's a Sandy every day.
Because it's a Sandy every day.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be an asset-based community development corporation,
Right.
or, you know, to be doing the work of the people is to be figuring out every single day how to create innovative solutions and ongoing solutions. So a part of that is, yes, providing services, but always being proactive and enabling the neighborhood to have a place to vision and to plan and to put those visions and plans to work through partnerships, strategic alliances that allow you to create policy recommendations. So the South Bronx is I think, just one of the most innovative leaders in figuring out how to really leverage community-based participatory planning efforts, linking them to long-term systemic policy solutions through alliances like the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, Southern Bronx River. I mean, there's so many alliances we're a part of. It's about movement building. So when Rebuild by Design came along, we were ready. We had plans, we had platforms, and you know, that addressed everything from, you know, the social resiliency to the economic resiliency of the community. And Penn Design and Olin and the Rebuild team really came with, you know, that extra added expertise in design, you know, and also.
So there was sort of a bridge between the people that had the technical skills.
Yes.
Right.
And I'm going to make and it was like the perfect storm. And I know that's
You're allowed
a
to
bad
use that.
thing to say when we're talking about resiliency, but it really was a confluence that allowed us to propel and leverage all of the plans. I mean, I think we counted at one time with RPA that we had something like 24 plans on the books for the Hunts Point Longwood section. And what were those plans doing? Collecting dust. I mean, they manifest themselves through certain political initiatives from time to time, but it really takes a continued effort to understand that when new opportunity comes along, that the solutions aren't necessarily new.
So where's the disconnect on that? Because you're saying you had 20 plans, you know, and LaToya, you would say, I'm sure in New Orleans you've had a gazillion plans. I know that around Queensbridge, that Urban Bound, you guys have been participating in every kind of plan. What is it that's going to help us get across the line? What's the impediment that we can't get community-based solutions elevated and in place before the perfect storm? Do you want to take a crack at that, Bishop Taylor?
Well, I mean, there's so many barriers. I mean, you have 344 or so conventional public housing neighborhoods in the city of New York and all 5 boroughs. 500,000 people or more are on the lease, and we know if they're on the lease, there are much more people that actually live there.
Right.
Average income, $22,000 a year. 65 to 70% of those households are headed by single women. You know, the educational disparities, the lack of access, 46.7% is a working population. I mean, there are all these systemic barriers that exist, you know, in the public housing space that we work in. And I just think that, you know, just jumping on the bandwagon and beating some instruments to make noise about what people want to do, you don't have to look far when you're looking for poverty in New York City.
No.
You know, you look right in public housing neighborhoods. These are the neighborhoods that we should really focus on. And I think that as we look at development all around New York City, and as the tide rises, all small ships should rise together. And I just think that, you know, a lot of the impediment is forgetting about people. You know, people have to be a part of the plan of prosperity, and not just some people, but all people. And how do we deal with those systemic issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the point that we make with our advocacy around infrastructure, is that infrastructure is important to people.
Right.
It's not just important to commerce. It's actually individuals, and cities are about people. But, you know, if you think, I guess I want to ask you guys a tough question, because I sense that part of this is about disconnection and isolation. So you led a Jane's Walk last year. People are familiar with Jane's Walk, named after Jane Jacobs, first weekend of May. LaToya's led them. I think, Kelly, you probably led one in the point before. You offered to lead one. It brings all sorts of newcomers in to actually experience, and many of them have never had they don't have a PhD.
Right.
And they've never been in there. And our experience there, as you'll recall, was that your community was extraordinarily welcoming of everyone that came in. Everybody that came in were really active urbanist listeners, but the media thought it was a terrible thing, and you had to counter that. So how can we get in front of this to say, actually, fostering these connections and networks across class, across race, is important?
Well, wasn't it interesting that the media billed the Jane's Walk in Queensbridge as negative, and went into our community to misrepresent what Jane's Walk would be, and people were jaded because the media went in to magnify an untruth, which unfortunately some of our journalistic professionals do quite often for the purpose of selling papers. I think that we need to use these media outlets, or journalists should be responsible enough to understand that they have a very important platform to springboard from, to bring about real sustainable change and resilience. And so, you know, thank God, you know, we weren't silent on that, and we fought back and went on radio and television and what have you, and said, no, you're wrong. And we had a very successful walk, and people were very welcoming to neighborhoods coming together, because how will we ever begin to become a collective if we don't understand the different parts that make the collective?
Which is actually what resilience is.
Exactly.
Resilience is about that connection and that connectivity. You know, one of the things that we talked about in New Orleans post-Katrina is that one of the challenges you had with the way the city had been planned is that there were disconnections between neighborhoods.
Sure.
You couldn't walk into the Lower Nine, for instance. It was challenging to do that. And I'm wondering, can we use these perfect storms or perverse opportunities to, you know, remind ourselves of the fundamental importance just of various forms of connective tissue in cities?
Well,
I mean, you formed it. You've reformed it post-Katrina.
Well, and I think it's demonstrating the people, like you were saying, creating the plan. That's what we did in Broadmoor. We did it ourselves. We partnered. We had the Kennedy School of Government that came in and helped with the technical piece, how we needed to develop this, or the way that the plan needed to look in terms of being credible. So it all culminated into a 328-page document that Broadmoor said every step of the way, hey, this is our plan, and it was essentially embedded in every city planning process and implemented by the people. So it's not, the disconnection, I think, is, hey, if we're waiting for someone to help us implement. But Broadmoor moved right along when government, and he would say, oh, no, your public school isn't coming back. Oh, we said, oh, yes, it is. And today, $29 million new construction, historic renovation, 600 kids a day, it serves. Told us our public library wasn't coming back. We said, oh, like hell it isn't. It's coming back. We raised $2.3 million privately to make sure the library's back. Now, $6 million library community center exists in the heart of the neighborhood, servicing the community. People who live, work, worship, attend school programming in the neighborhood. So people, the community, validates its process, its plan, and how that neighborhood or its community or its city is going to be better than it's ever been before.
So, and just describe for people the
Yeah.
sing assistant.
Clap to that.
You can imagine trying to resist her during the recovery. Just describe for people the composition of Broadmoor so people know.
Broadmoor is a microcosm of the city of New Orleans demographically and socioeconomically. Was home to 7,232 residents pre-Katrina, mediocre library, low-performing school, 2,400 properties, 68% African American, 25% Caucasian, 0.6% Asian, 3% Latino. So again, people earning anywhere from $13,000 a year to $400,000 a year. So the neighborhood is back 96%. We're doing very well, but we are seeing, new people coming in which we embrace. But the market is up over 58% in the neighborhood. I can no longer sell my home and purchase another home in my own neighborhood.
Right.
And so that's something that we have to look at as a city in terms of affordability. You asked what keeps me up at night. That's something that keeps me up.
Whether or not you can, whether you
It's affordability. You know, we want to ensure balance, right? But we have some communities, it's up 148%, 143%, when wages haven't increased only by $41 since Katrina. So still the average is about $36,000,
Right.
but markets are up.
Right.
And so it's not being balanced out. So I'm very concerned about our cultural barriers being priced out.
I mean, one of the dilemmas you've got is that you're sort of victims of your own success. You've brought the city back. All sorts of folks have moved in. Hipsters, you know, they have hipsters in New Orleans too. And a lot of them left here and went there. And so it's creating an imbalance in the housing mix. I can appreciate that. And of course, you don't have as many units as you once had.
No, that's exactly right. But not just the housing, but the fabric, the culture of the city of New Orleans.
Right. Right.
You know, our big chiefs and our big queens,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
It's New Orleans.
Exactly. Let's talk about the point for a second. I mean, I'm interested that all three of you employ a strategy where you're talking about investing in hubs that are critical to the neighborhood that help organize and get people connected. And the point is that, right?
No, absolutely. And you took the words right out of my mouth here, like victims of your own success. You know,
Right.
you work to do things like build waterfront parks and build greenways, and what you're doing is you're increasing the land values, but because we're just victims of the market, right? And we still have a political system that yields to the market far more than they do yield to the needs and the voice of the people. And what I want to say is that is why it is very critical to do what we do. It's not necessarily the sexiest thing in the world to say that you're working on plans all the time. You know, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it is critically important to keep the community engaged in creating those plans and then allowing political capital to develop that is strategic and is movement built and across the city, because none of what we do is alone. We work with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. I mentioned that, but the Southern Bronx River Watershed Alliance, the Bronx River Alliance. I mean, it's all a part of a larger vision and for a reason. And none of these things happen overnight. The plan that you're talking about, I mean, we're talking about a lens of, a 30-year lens you have to have. Some of the projects that we're working on are beyond 30 years, but we understand that it's countering some really bad infrastructure decisions, right?
Yeah.
And some pretty bad decisions that were made by those in power that did not have our best interests at heart. So it's our responsibility to turn that back and to create a sort of a sustained approach to planning, and one that allows our neighborhoods to not just put a pretty plan in place and make the neighborhood prettier, for the market to come and take over and then push us out. Right. And so what we're fighting are the forces of gentrification. I said the G word, and I don't want to.
Don't worry, it's not the first time it's going to be, well, not the last time it'll be said over the last time.
But it's that balance.
Yeah. But I mean, here's what keeps me up at night also is that question, is how can we create new strategies that allow for the communities that have planned their return and invested, their time and their resources and their energy into improving conditions so that it is a better place. How can we ensure that they stay there?
Yeah.
So the strategy is multifaceted, and that is why I understand the holistic strategy of the work. It's really impossible to just do one thing. You have to, you do have to be a jack of all trades, and I'm going to say a master of all trades, a jack of all trades and a master of all trades, because, while you're in a neighborhood that is still suffering from generational poverty, but yet has increasing market.
Oh, no, I know. I've been wanting to be the police officer, the construction worker, the teacher. I mean, when
you have been.
Oh, yeah, well, you have to be. But one of the things that Kelly mentioned, like New Orleans, we're in the midst of adopting our comprehensive zoning ordinance, and one that we haven't done in 40 years. And so in the midst of this, and actually tomorrow we'll be doing the motion on it, but what strikes me is 9 years later and hearing from the community, we seem to have lost the whole issue of flood mitigation. We're a community that floods. We need to be building high on dry, safe ground. And so I'm not hearing that from the community as I heard 7 years ago. So it's my job to kind of push, keep reminding people that we have to be resilient. We have to be sustainable. And hey, the I have a view speeches, come on. But that's what we've been hearing. But we have to just keep making people understand the environment in which we live, and we can build safer, and we can ensure that it's affordable, and that everyone has, a right to that.
Yeah. I mean, we have short memories, don't we?
Oh.
Yeah, next year is 10 years Katrina. Sandy is 2 years. I mean, and as we say, the long Sandy. You've been at it for how long have you lived in Queensbridge, Bishop Taylor?
How long have I lived?
Yeah.
50 years.
50 years, yeah. So I think let's just finish with you talking about what keeps you up awake at night.
Well, working, collaboratively, our mission is really breaking cycles of poverty in public housing neighborhoods. And we started 10 years ago, not working adversarially, but working in an alliance with the New York City Housing Authority to figure out how could we do that? How could we give residents the tools and resources for economic development and self-sufficiency? And, what I quickly realized is that the disinvestment on the part of government to public housing neighborhoods, especially in the maintenance of the capital, the brick and mortar, just continued to languish, and the buildings continue to crumble. So in as much as you're, giving residents, these tools and resources to do better, they're living in deplorable conditions, which has, a mental effect on people.
And makes them much more vulnerable to a variety of risks.
Exactly, and I think that, the New York City Housing Authority, has great leadership now and has had some good leadership in the past. I've worked with most of the chairs, all of the chairs since Urban Upbound started. We celebrated our 10th anniversary September 1st. And I just think that, we have to pay attention to where people live. And I don't think that it sends a clear message when over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, the government says, we're not giving you more money. It starts out with, this much support, and then it goes down to this much support, and there's no real explanation. And how do you expect the Housing Authority to provide safe, livable space for people? And then remember, in New York City, public housing is the final frontier of affordable housing in this city. Where will people live after we develop all the waterfronts? Where will they live after we become victims of our own success?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that, I think this phrase, victims of our own success, is going to resonate for the next few days. Downstairs this morning, the fellow from Hong Kong said it's become a victim of its own success. London has said the same thing. I think we're sharing these struggles, regardless of the income level of the neighborhood, when change happens and people get edged out. I think it's so interesting, the common threads here around resilience is about patience. And I think it's about diversity. It's about keeping people rooted so that you continue to have a bunch of different options. One of the most inspiring things that we've seen out of these extraordinary challenges has been the kind of innovative solutions and the kind of leadership that you see. LaToya hasn't told you that, she went and bought the company. She's a city councilor. And Kelly and Bishop Taylor, when are you going to start run? When are you going to run? We're ready to have you lead. We're ready to have you lead. So, on that note, we just thank the panel very much to advocate for community-based resilience, and thank you for being part of it with us this week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.